Good evening, everybody. How's it going? So this is going to be split up into two parts. One, I'm going to kind of go through the story, and I want to tell you just my story in the hope that there's something in there that you can connect to or relate to. But the most interesting and most important part of this time that we have together is getting to know you a little bit and understanding the questions that you might have about either my story, about entrepreneurship, about the progress you want to make with anything that you care about or that's important. If there's a way that I can be helpful after I kind of tell you what I've been through and what I've seen and what I do, that's the most important part of this experience, to make it unique and custom for you. So that's what I want to find out how we can do. So I'll start by introducing myself. So again, I'm Neal. I'm born and raised on the south side of Chicago. My simple kind of statement of purpose is I'm passionate about teaching people how to solve meaningful problems with technology. I'll get into why and how that works in a bit, but let me just give you the brief version of it. Right now, CodeNow is the organization that I am leading. It's a national not-for-profit. It's over 6 years old, and we have been serving over 2,000 high schoolers from all types of backgrounds, but focused on underrepresented groups and low-income students. And we teach them how to code, design, and start companies and understand entrepreneurship. And as we work with these young people, they identify problems that they care about solving in their lives and in their communities, and we happen to teach them a technical skill that allows them to get their start in software development, either as an internship, as their own app or company they want to build, or what they call apprenticeships, where you work under someone else. So I co-founded the Starter League before I took over CodeNow, which was the first coding bootcamp or coding school in America. So there was this new model that came out, and I'll go into how I started this a while ago, but the simple kind of statistics around this is we were the first coding school. We taught nearly 1,600 students from all over the world over half a decade, and a lot of classes, a lot of different subjects, and we had a lot of people as a part of our team. And the progress that we were able to make in such a short period of time, a lot of people, I guess, mentioned how it disrupted some of the educational models, the traditional approaches to education. So a lot of people were taking our courses in addition to things like graduate school or other trade programs and things like that. But nothing like what we had built existed before. And I'll talk to you about how that works, but I'll just give you a few examples of some of the stories that have come out of our program. So Rose here came in having no background in technology whatsoever. She was an activist, and she came to my program and she learned how to build an app that she really cared about for social good called M-Relief. And it was to help low-income people easily find out if they qualify for social services. And they went through this really prestigious, the #1 startup accelerator in the world is in Silicon Valley. It's called Y Combinator. Rose got into that program after graduating from my school with this app that she built at one of our hackathons. I'm really proud of the work she does. She's now the executive director / CEO of the organization, and they've been going for 3 or 4 years now, and they're doing really well. Claire's another great example from our program where she had this idea to help employees at companies give feedback to their bosses about whether work was going well or not going well, because it was a problem she personally experienced at some of the companies she worked at. And she prototyped this app to help employees respond to questions, both via email and with a web interface, to tell their leaders what they could be doing better as managers, as bosses. And it allows the team to really get to know each other in a very dynamic way. She's now the CEO of that company, and there's another company that she kind of collaborated with called Bootcamp, which I'll tell you about in a bit. But they're one of the most famous software companies in the tech space. But she worked with them to get that going, and she's now running this company, and they've made a lot of progress in just 3 or 4 years. And then Pat's another example of someone who came from finance. He was an investment banker. He already had a job, but he quit his job to come to my school. And when he quit his job 3 years later, he's now running a company that has over 400 people working for it. He's raised $10 million in funding, and he had this kind of vision for this company coming out of our program and being able to prototype it with a technical skill set after being a part of our school. So I share these stories just as some examples of the, now almost a couple thousand outcomes that we've had at our program. But I like to think, I'm kind of like the Johnny Appleseed of Chicago Tech. There are a lot of people out there now that are working in jobs and are part of our community, both in Chicago and beyond, that I'm really proud to have helped serve and get started. But I want to take it back. So I want to start with kind of where I grew up again. So this is one of the blizzards in Chicago. I don't know if anybody was around for any of these, but one of the things in growing up on the south side is that, it's so spread out, whereas the north side is pretty densely packed. So it's really hard to get around. So whenever it was cold, or sometimes it could even be dangerous, I wanted to stay inside, and money was quite tight. So, we didn't grow up having much, so I ate a lot of these. Anybody know fried bologna sandwiches? So I ate a lot of those, but I also ate a lot of these. So I call these my peanut butter and jelly quesadillas. So my mom was actually Honduran and Filipino, so we had a lot of lumpia as well. So I had this mixed household where my dad was black, my mom was Honduran and Filipino, and we had this weird cultural mishmash of food that we consumed. But on the south side of Chicago, I went to this kindergarten called Shoesmith, and I remember when I was there, it was really hard for me to read. I struggled reading in school. And something really interesting happened. When I was at home hanging out with my cousins, I started playing this video game called The Legend of Zelda. And my mom noticed that I was playing this Zelda game. Even though I was struggling in school with spelling, she was watching me play this game. And if anyone's ever played Zelda, there's a lot of text that you have to read through. So she saw me reading the text, and when she was watching me play the game, she couldn't keep up because I was scrolling through the text so fast and figuring out how to solve the puzzles. So when she picked up on this, my mom's a brilliant woman, she figured out that Zelda was what's called an RPG, a role-playing game. So she went and got more of these RPGs for me to play. She got me a few more, so I got to play Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger and these other cool games that I really loved, and I became this voracious reader. I just got really into it, and I got quite good at it. And I used video games not only to learn skills, but it was also as an escape sometimes, because growing up where I grew up, you didn't always want to be outside, unfortunately. It wasn't always a place that you could just kind of comfortably walk around, especially just with young people or with your friends. So instead, I would stay home, and I would play these games all the time. And some of my favorite games I like to talk about, does anybody know or remember what this game is? I've never had anyone guess this at any event I've ever spoken at. No guesses. Anybody want to take a guess? He's thinking about it. Yeah, what is it?
Super Mario, note something. I've heard of it.
Ooh, see, this is a gotcha question, because this is actually Super Mario Paint. Okay? This is Super Mario Paint, but in Super Mario Paint, they had this music generator. So anyway, that was just one of my favorite games. But there was another game I played. So games like NBA Jam and Mortal Kombat were what a lot of my friends were playing, and that was really popular, but I was really into these role-playing games. So this Final Fantasy VII, this is like one of my favorite games of all time. This was yet another kind of version of the type of thing that I like to enjoy. And even though I was growing up on the south side of Chicago, where it was more popular to play the sports games and the fighting games, this RPG piece was something that I think really, really helped shape how I saw a lot of things. Because these stories, they were kind of like reading books, like the hero's journey, and just really admiring the choices you could make and the journey you could go on, as a kid. There was another thing I like to do. I like to make music. I don't do it anymore, but when I was younger, I used to make beats and everything. And there was this software called Hip Hop EJ, and apparently it was the future of music. No longer, but it was a cool piece of software, and I got really into apps and games and technologies, but I was always consuming them. I didn't actually understand how they were made just yet. So there was another piece of software that I found out about. Somebody knows what this is. Anybody know what this is? What is this? This is Napster. There we go. So I discovered Napster probably around 5th or 6th grade. And what was cool about Napster was, like I said, money was tight. So growing up, it was kind of tough to kind of have a little extra income for anything. But I discovered this other tool. So if anybody remembers CD burners, they used to burn songs on the CDs and MP3s. So I would make these mixtapes and on discs, and I would sell them at school for $3-5, something like that. But that was my way of generating a little bit of money at school, to have just get a snack or buy some candy or something. I also sold Christmas trees. at the local grocery store. That was another thing I did in the wintertime to kind of just get some money, but also what I didn't know was that I got this experience of actually figuring out how to sell people things, right? So I could probably sell some of you a Christmas tree right now. I learned how to do that. I also did tree removal in the summers. This was one of the hardest jobs I've ever had in my life. It was great pay for a kid. It was 12, 13, sometimes 14 bucks an hour. And I was only, a young kid, but it was really hard. We had to have 8 or 9 different chainsaws. You had to have a whole crew of guys go and dismantle these trees and take it down piece by piece. It was really hard manual labor. But in addition to that, when I got into high school, I decided that I really liked sports, and track and field was something I fell in love with. And in addition to track and field, I was able to go to the Junior Olympics, and I just ran a lot. I was one of the fastest kids in the state of Illinois, which was really cool and a lot of fun back then, but I lost my connection to technology. As a kid, I was nerding out with hip-hop EJ and video games and all these cool apps and things. But then once I went into high school, I fell really into sports, and I never really looked back. And as that was going, I had these aspirations to go to the NFL someday, right? So I was making enough progress where I said, you know what, I'm on a path here where I can be a really, really good athlete. And because we grew up not having a lot of money, maybe that's the way for me to take care of my family. But something happened. I got a back injury junior year going into my senior year in high school. That threw me off completely. So the question was, now what? What do I do now? And thankfully, while I was trying to be this good athlete, I grinded and I got into Northwestern University, which was really cool. It was a great opportunity. It was something that was really special. But even when I got there, I thought, you know what? How do I make money? That was the question I had. I said, all right, I'm at this nice school. Everyone's proud of me. No one from my family's really graduated from college before. Like, I owe it to them to make sure that I'm earning something, that I'm being successful, and I can go take care of them. Now, it was interesting because I thought that was what motivated me. I thought money was the thing that was going to make me happy and take care of my folks. But boy, was I wrong. I discovered very quickly that I loved entrepreneurship. And instead of just trying to make money and do a job that would pay me a lot of things, maybe I could solve a problem and help someone else and start an organization. So I had the pleasure of joining the founding team of this company called Context Media. The new name of this company is Outcome Health. Now let me tell you, I won't go into the full story about how this company was started and how it works. If you are curious about my first company that I started, we can talk about it in Q&A. Long story short is, I helped start the company within the first year from 2006 to 2007. I left after that because I decided to stay in school. My co-founder decided to stay and run the business and grow it. It is now valued at $5.5 billion, right? And it's still around today in Chicago. So that was a really cool experience to be a part of the first year of a company that ended up becoming this like crazy multi-billion-dollar business, and I understood the early days of how that happened. So that's one piece. Then my sophomore year, as I was still in school but kind of really thinking about still being this business guy and this entrepreneur, I decided I wanted to start a barbershop. So I wrote a business plan for a barbershop, went to the south side, went to all these different barbers, and I said, hey, I have this business plan, I have this idea for a barbershop, what do you think? Ended up meeting a guy who said, you know what, I'm just now opening a barbershop, why don't we partner and let's open up another one? So I opened up 2 barbershops with this guy and learned so much about how a brick and mortar business worked. I didn't realize how important cleaning towels were and like making sure that your employees were either, or your contractors were employees or not, and what kind of benefits they got. There were so many things I learned in running this business. But then going into my junior year at Northwestern, there's this company called UBS. It's a bank. I had this opportunity again to become this banker guy, to make the money that I talked about. But what I learned really quickly again was that this was not the life for me. So I had this offer to take this job at UBS, and I decided not to take it, even though as an intern over the summer working for this company, I would have made more than what my mom made in annual salary in just those 3 months. So it would have made a huge difference for us in our family, but I decided to turn it down because I knew it was something I didn't want to do. So instead, I said, you know what? I've started a couple businesses. I've heard of this thing called venture capital, where you can actually invest in early stage companies and technology businesses. So companies that you all are familiar with, Google, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. These are all organizations that raise venture capital from early stage investors that took a greater risk on growing these businesses. I said, you know what, I want to work for one of these companies. And it was funny because a lot of my advisors and the people I had met and professors and business people kind of patted me on the head and they said, that's cute, Neal, but you're only 19 years old and interns at venture capital firms have masters in business administration degrees. So good luck. And I took that as a challenge. So I ended up wiggling my way into working at a venture capital firm in Chicago called OCA Ventures. And I convinced them to hire me despite the fact that I did not have an MBA, despite the fact that I had very limited experience doing investment, because I had worked really hard to show them that I really cared about what we could do by investing in early stage companies, and that my experience in helping build a couple businesses during my freshman and sophomore year was relevant enough to be helpful to those entrepreneurs and do the work. So they brought me on. When I graduated from Northwestern, I changed jobs from working at this other, from one venture capital firm to another. Now at Sandbox Industries, the other firm I worked at, it was a really, really cool experience because I had two jobs. One was help with investing in companies, sourcing deals. The other side of it, though, was I was an EIR, Entrepreneur in Residence. So what that meant was in addition to helping invest in startup companies, I also had the freedom to come up with ideas of my own and prototype them and work on them within this business. And that was a really cool job because I got to sit there and think about cool things that I wanted to make that I thought would be helpful to the world. And then I had a budget and the resources to bring on team members to build out these products. Now, just to give you a scope of the timeline, this is around 2010, okay? 2010, early 2010 is when I'm at this company. Right around that time is when this whole app craze is really taking off. Like all the cool software companies and apps are really coming out. There's like Tumblr and like, you guys remember some of those. There's all the new crowd now, which I'll talk about. But back then, those were like the cool kids on the block. And I was hiring software engineers and user interface designers and people to help me prototype these apps and these programs, these mobile apps, these web applications, all these different things that were high technology, if you will. But the problem was, when I was at Northwestern, I studied economics and education and social policy. I didn't study computer science or graphic design or software engineering. So I was hiring people and spending thousands of dollars per month on their time to have them prototype the ideas in my head. But I had all these thoughts about what I wanted it to be and how I wanted it to work, and they weren't being realized fully by the people I was paying. So I got really frustrated. And I said, you know what? Like, maybe I should learn how to code. Maybe I should learn how to make software and solve problems myself. So with no experience in it, I remember walking into my job one day, walked up to the CEO. I said, hey, Nick, I'm out. Quitting today. I need to learn. I need to learn how to do this, because if I don't know how to do this, sure, I know a little bit about business, I know how to run companies, that's great, but the future is clearly in software and technology, and I need to be a part of that. And if I'm not, I'm going to fall behind. So I made a crazy decision to quit this awesome job just because I thought on a hunch that I could learn how to code. So when I first started trying to learn how to code, it really felt like I was like entering the matrix, and I had to take the red or the blue pill. And then when I first started coding, this is what it looked like. It didn't make any sense to me. I was like, what the heck is going on? I thought it was going to be like this. When Neo in the Matrix jacks in and he knows Kung Fu, I was like, all right, I'm just going to read all these books and I'll get it. But that's not quite how it worked. It was much harder. So it turns out a lot of people said, go learn how to code, but that's not really how it played out in practice. So I had to learn the hard way. And I mean quite literally the hard way. I read a book called Learn Python the Hard Way. And Python's a programming language that is one of the more popular ones for database analysis and basic web programming. And I read this book, and it was cool, but it wasn't quite resonating with me. It didn't speak to me. I completed the work, but I didn't feel good afterwards. It wasn't until I discovered this book. It's called Wise Poignant Guide to Ruby, that I really fell in love with programming and began to appreciate it. This is a really weird book. You're not really going to learn how to code if you do it. But this guy who wrote it was so interesting and quirky. It made me fascinated with this other language. So we have English and Spanish and Chinese and French. In programming, there's Ruby and Python and JavaScript and Erlang and Perl. So I kept seeing this thing in these Ruby forums called MinSwan. I kept seeing this like MinSwan. Why are people saying MinSwan? As they were talking in forums online whenever I needed to debug a program or make some progress or fix something. I kept saying MinSwan. I was like, MinSwan, what does that mean? So I finally figured out what it meant. It's an acronym. It stands for Matz is nice, so we are nice. And Matz is actually the creator of the Ruby programming language. He's a Japanese guy. And he's just a very pleasant individual, very welcoming. And what turns out is the community online for the Ruby programming language was so beginner friendly and welcoming that was the home for me. That was the place I wanted to start. So as I started coding and programming, I was really passionate about being a part of the Ruby community and learning everything that they had to offer. But at the same time as I was programming, I had another opportunity. Does anybody know what flag this is? What country? Dominican Republic, Honduras, nope. One more guess. What was that? Guatemala. No, this is Uruguay. Right? So I had an opportunity to move here because there was this guy who lived there who moved from San Francisco. His name is Rabble. What kind of name is Rabble? Strange name. But Rabble was one of the original engineers of a little app called Twitter. Right? So this guy helped build Twitter in the early days with the Ruby programming language. And I got connected to Rabble somehow, and I told him about my journey of learning how to program and being a part of it. And this guy said, "Wow, Neal, you're not half bad. Like you seem like you're on the path to become an engineer, and you have a lot of business skills. Would you be interested in, joining my company and helping lead the business development stuff? But at the same time, I can help you learn, Ruby as a programming language and become a better engineer." Amazing opportunity. I bought a plane ticket right away with the little money I had left. And I thought I was going to move to Uruguay. And I told all my friends that's where I was going to go. But then something else happened. I had this idea that there had to be a better way. The journey I had gone on to teach myself programming over the past year seemed like arduous, unnecessary. Why was it so hard? Why did I have to read all these books on my own, in my apartment, and struggle so much? Why was it that at every school curriculum I looked at, there wasn't someone offering the skills that I knew I needed in order to make my ideas real? So I had this idea to start that school. It was originally called Code Academy. I'll tell you how we changed our name later, but that was the original name of our program, and we had this vision for it. So that was number 2. Uruguay, Code Academy. There was a number 3. There was another option, third door. Oh, by the way, just to clarify, Code Academy is not the same as Code Academy. There's a difference between those two. I can talk about that in the Q&A if you're curious, or if you want to know about trademark law. So something else happened. I got a call from a friend of mine. I'll show you what they look like, but it was basically a call to action to say, hey, our president needs to get reelected. Will you help? And so the guy on the left, his name is Michael Slaby, and the guy on the right's name is Harper Reed. Both Michael Slaby and Harper Reed were CTOs. Does anybody know what CTO stands for? Chief Technology Officer. So within an organization or a company, this is the person that is the senior leader of all things technology and software, right? So Michael Slaby on the left was the Chief Technology Officer for Barack Obama's election in 2008. Harper Reed on the right was Barack Obama's Chief Technology Officer for 2012. I got to know these guys. Harper, in particular on the right, is one of the people who helped me get started in programming. They offered me a job to join the re-election campaign for Barack Obama in 2011. And it would have been an amazing job. The pay would have been great. I would have gotten incredible experiences. I would have learned so much from this massive team of engineers and passionate designers and developers and product managers and other volunteers. But I turned it down to start my school. And I canceled my plane ticket to go to Uruguay because I believed that through the school, I would have made the greatest impact on the world possible from my own kind of perspective. I like to think that this is the face that he made when he heard that I wasn't going to help him out, but I never know. He probably doesn't even know I exist, but it's fine. He got elected anyway. Then I launched a school, and I show this website first because it was so kind of dinky. It was, we just hacked it together over a couple weekends. It wasn't that elegant or beautiful or anything like that. It was just enough to say, hey, we've got a school. We want to help people learn how to code in 3 months. We're going to teach you Rails. We'll see what happens. But what was really cool is when we got this website out the door, right before we launched, this actually isn't cool, but we ran out of money, or my co-founder Mike did, and I only had a few dollars left. And it was really, really close to the metal when we launched this program. But thankfully, when we launched that website, we literally had people from all over the world who heard about it and who wanted to relocate and fly into Chicago just to be a part of that program. It was crazy. And in doing so, we were able to kind of launch this new school that had really never existed before. We originally launched our program out of this company called Groupon. They leased out a couple cubicles, some desk space that I was able to have my first school setting in. We didn't know what we were doing, so I had a Amazon cardboard box from an order, and then we had a projector that we kind of jerry-rigged onto it, and we didn't have a whiteboard or anything like this, so we got a bunch of white paper, taped it on the wall, and that's what we used as a backdrop for our class. But it worked, and we taught these people how to code, and it worked. And we upgraded our website, we added more classes, more people heard about it, people kept kind of flooding in and helping us grow this organization, and we started one of the very first coding boot camps in the country. Then came 1871. So 1871, does anybody know the significance of that year for Chicago? It's the year of the Chicago fires, exactly right. So 1871 was the year of the Chicago fire, but it's also a new organization in Chicago that is the hub of innovation and entrepreneurship for early stage businesses and startup companies. It originally started as a 50,000 square foot space, but now it's expanded to, I believe, over 150,000 square feet. These were my classrooms in 1871 when we helped launch the space, and we were in the first class of companies that joined, and we actually put on the very first event in the space as well. But yeah, with these 2 classrooms that we ran, we had so many people come through this space, join our school, build companies, solve problems with software, make apps, get jobs. It was a really magical experience. But as I kept going, I got to hang out with that guy a little bit. I had this partnership with the city of Chicago where we taught Chicago public school teachers and city college teachers our curriculum to help them take it to public schools all throughout Chicago. So we were able to work with them. We worked with a few private schools as well, and with Northwestern University and the University of Chicago. All these programs were really interested in what we were doing in my school, this little school that just started a couple years ago. But the curriculum that we had developed and the progress that we had made in such a short period of time made these organizations want to reach out to us and be a part of this new movement of teaching people the future skills that they're going to need to actually start companies and actually get better jobs. So we rebranded to the Starter League. We changed our name to the Starter League because our school wasn't just about coding. Our school was about helping people get their start in all aspects of software and technology, which includes design, which includes product development and entrepreneurship. So we wanted to be the starting place and a community of people, a league of sorts, where people could be a part of this larger kind of movement of progress when it comes to technology and software. So this is just one class of the, almost 1,600 students that we've taught over the years. And with this group, it was just so much fun to meet so many different people all the time. And it was just a dream come true for me because, as I said, back in the day, I thought money was the most important thing. It turns out far more important than money to me are relationships with people, strong friendships, and helping them make progress and getting to know their stories, everyone's individual story and the progress that they want to make in their lives. That's what fuels me. That's what gets me up every day. So last year, I sold my company to another school called Full Stack Academy. They also went through Y Combinator, which I talked about earlier. But they're a coding school based out of New York, and I decided that I wanted to partner with them because their program in New York was really cool, and my program in Chicago was really cool. So I said, hey, you're cool, I'm cool, let's work together and be cool together. So we decided to do that last year, and what's really great is full stack I really liked, because even though we were making a lot of progress as the starter league, full stack was doing some really impressive work by getting students into companies like Dropbox and Google and Adobe and all these really like prestigious organizations where students were like very happy in the workplace, being paid really well, but more importantly, feeling like they had a fulfilling and meaningful experience in their job. So I said, you know what? I want to join forces with you guys and make progress like that for all of our students too. So that's what we decided to do. Now I want to talk a little bit about pedagogy and my kind of philosophy as an educator, because I wasn't just the CEO, founder of the organization. I actually helped teach as well. I love teaching. And when I was in school, I noticed something interesting, like about myself. When I was programming, very different than when I was in school, you would get an error message. So you're trying to write some code, some computer code, and you'd hit enter to run a program, but I would notice that my students were afraid to hit enter. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's going to mess up. I said, so what? Run it. Well, if I don't have it right, it's going to break. Great. Break it. So the funny thing about programming, and even in my school, is that there were no grades, and failure was actually a good thing. Because when you messed up, you get what's called an error message. When you get an error message, it tells you what's wrong. When it tells you what's wrong, thanks, now I can go fix it. So unlike traditional school, our program was all about trying something and it not working and then you trying it again. It was kind of like every moment was an open book test. So I have this image up here because my educational philosophy is less about carrots and sticks, meaning punishment and reward, providing some sort of fear if something goes wrong or an incentive if something goes right. I think intrinsic motivation and asking the question, why? Why do you care about this? Why is this important to you? Why do you want to learn how to code? Why do you want to build that app? Who do you want to help in doing so? Those are the questions that if you have answers to when you're in a classroom, when you're in a learning environment, if you know the answer to your why, anything's possible. The grades are less important. The ideas are far more meaningful. That's what I discovered for myself, and I was able to extend that to other people. So yeah, it's cool because it's kind of a trick. Because on one hand, I say, don't worry about your grades. Worry about the why. You're like, well, but I don't want to get bad grades. You won't. Because if you care more about what you're learning than just the grade, you have even more incentive to do good work and to do a good job and to understand it better. That is like, I want everyone in the world to have that experience of being in a classroom and knowing their why and enjoying every moment, not because there's pressure to get a grade or get a credential, but because there's just a pure, genuine desire for the knowledge. That's what I want all of you to experience too. I'm sure some of you have in some classrooms. Some teachers are amazing and find a way to draw it out of you. But it's kind of the difference between reading a cookbook and becoming a great chef. That's the distinction in that kind of environment. Where are you telling someone to follow a recipe, to go through a manual and follow a series of steps? Are you teaching them to think very thoughtfully and carefully about the experience that they want to provide to someone else through the work that they do, through the ideas that they start to wrestle with and understand? So I want to run through a few other things that I'm up to right now today, just to kind of fast forward to real life. But then I'm going to move into getting to know some of you. So I just recently joined the Board of Trustees of the Chiara Valley Montessori School in Evanston, Illinois. I'm really proud of this work because I didn't really know anything about Montessori education. I knew some people who said they went to Montessori schools growing up. I just knew that they were really expensive. So no way I was going to go to a school like that. But when I learned about the story of Montessori and her work in education and thinking about a different approach to a learning environment, I realized that there was a lot of overlap. And what I was able to do at Code Academy and the Starter League and through CodeNow and Full Stack. And there were a lot of connections to intrinsic motivations in learning environments. And that's an experience now that I'm able to channel to young people in an environment that I wished I could have been a part of. And now my mission at this organization is to help them include even more people in the process, because unfortunately these schools are still very expensive. So we need to be more inclusive when it comes to how these programs work. I am also on the board of directors of my high school. I didn't mention the high school I went to. It's called Mount Carmel High School. It's on the south side of Chicago. It's a football school. Obviously, I was a football player. All boys Catholic school. And at Mount Carmel, there's still a lot more work to be done when it comes to solving the public and private dynamic within the city. And that's something I'm really interested in trying to figure out. And there's a lot of different overlap and partnerships right now happening in the city itself. And I'm hoping that our kind of work here is going to extend to affect the greater community in Woodlawn on the south side by the University of Chicago. I'm also really passionate about Northwestern and the school that I went to. So I'm now an adjunct professor there. So I teach engineering entrepreneurship at the engineering school to software engineers and industrial engineers and electrical engineers. I also teach at the law school. So it's just funny thinking about these experiences because 10 years ago, I was in that classroom. I was taking the class that I get to teach now, which is crazy. But to think that after just deciding to go do it, starting companies and making them successful eventually, not without struggle, which I'm happy to talk about in Q&A, that I could be up in a classroom actually teaching the very class that I took a decade ago, which is just a crazy feeling to have. But I'm very happy about it because it allows me to give back in a way that I never imagined I could. But in addition to Northwestern and in addition to that Montessori school, I'm also very passionate about the creative community. So I got involved with the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. And what's really cool about artists is they're creators, they're makers, but they shy away from entrepreneurship and business. They don't like those words. Those are kind of dirty words among artists. But I ask them, I say, well, how do you make money? They say, oh, well, I have my practice. And I say, well, what does your practice do? Oh, well, I make these things and then people pay me for it. And I go, sounds like you have a business, right? So even though they say they don't like business, they in fact are in business. So if you've ever sold something independently, in the eyes of the law, you're a sole proprietor, which is technically a business. So everybody could be a business owner. All of you could start your own business if you haven't already. It doesn't matter how small or large it is. You can just start somewhere. And I want to help all of you do that like I've been helping them do that. And then finally, my other commitment is at the Turing School of Software and Design. This is a nonprofit. This is a weird one. They're actually based in Denver, Colorado. But the founder of this nonprofit is a near and dear friend of mine who helped me get my start by building out Code Academy. And he's a gentleman. His name's Jeff Casimir. He's one of the best teachers I've ever met. He went through Teach for America. He was a school teacher himself in Washington, D.C. Then he became a principal of a school. And he took all those skills and he became this great kind of instructor of software engineering. And I'm very proud to be on that board because I think it's quite literally one of the best coding schools in the world. So I love Chicago. I think Chicago's the best city in the world. But I will say that one of the very best coding schools happens to be in Denver, Colorado. And I happen to be a snowboarder, so there's a little bit of selfish benefit there too. So I want to close out with a quick lyric from Biggie Smalls, who's one of my favorite rappers. So he said, the key to staying on top of everything is to treat everything like it's your first project, like it's your first day back when you were an intern. That's just how you have to treat things, just stay hungry. So the way I want to close out this talk and move into Q&A and get to know some of you is to say, you have to treat everything like it's your first project. Because as I was going through this journey of doing all these weird things and getting all these jobs and all these steps in my life, I was constantly told, wait your turn. This isn't for you. You need more experience. Like, you're not ready yet. Always, constantly told what I couldn't do, what I wasn't qualified enough for, what I didn't have enough experience in. And at every moment, I didn't care. I got really excited. Whenever there's something new that someone says, ooh, that's too hard. I don't know if you can do that. No way you could start a coding school. No way you could get a job in venture capital. No way you could get into Northwestern University. I said, no, I would like to do that. So I'm going to try, even if you don't think I can. And if you all can do the same thing in some way and channel that in your life, I hope that you'll find some success in that. So yeah, that's the end of, I think, my talk. But now I would like to get to know some of you and hear any questions. So thank you. Sweet. All right, so I left my contact info up here. I'm going to hang out right here, and we can just turn this into a Q&A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the question you asked so that the camera here is recording it. But forgive this silly image. I didn't make that myself. Someone drew that and I found it in a Google image search, which is kind of weird, but whatever. Kind of looks like me. Put on a few pounds since. But that's my cell, and those are my emails. I want to be helpful to you. But let's get the conversation started now. But even after this, I want you to know that I would love to be helpful to you in whatever way you think you'd need it, because it's just what I do. But let's open it up. Let's have a conversation. So it sounds like the question is, did I see a certain kind of pattern of demographics and types of people come into the program in the beginning and now, and how does that measure up to a lot of the senior engineers and developers that are kind of the old guard of the software community? Is that about right? Okay, so where do I start with this? There's so many stories I could tell you. I'll say this. When I started off, and I had this idea, and I didn't have the idea yet. I was just learning how to code myself. I'm just this like 21, 22-year-old, guy, and I'm just like, you know what? I want to learn how to be a software engineer. I was reading all my books and doing all that online like learning, and then eventually I started, in Chicago, meeting with some of the developers, and I have to tell you, there was this kind of dichotomy that existed, because on one hand they said, Neal, you're really good. Like, I'd hire you. Do you want to work for us? Do you want to be an apprentice? Like, you work really hard. You seem to be doing a lot of things, but I don't think this coding school thing, I don't think it's going to work, because, you're different. You're special. You're not like the rest of them. That kind of thing. That's the kind of feedback I would get, where it was almost like they could see an individual's progress, but they didn't understand the prospect of a larger systemic shift in an educational model. So no one thought that you could teach adults how to code. Most of them said it was too late, or it'd be really difficult, or you have to do it on your own. You have to go back to grad school and get a computer science degree. But as I was interviewing and getting to know some of the engineers I really looked up to, it turns out so many of them were self-taught. So many of them just said, hey, I don't have a computer science degree, but I just said I really liked coding, so I decided to go into it and start making some stuff. I said, oh, that's really interesting. Well, maybe I can match that pattern for more people to have access to this. So the whole aim and purpose of my work was to be inclusive and to have far more people as a part of the engineering and development community. Because when you went to any meetup, any tech event, most of the people in the room looked the same. There was a disappointing number of women in the room, very few, if any, at so many events. Very few people of color in the room at a lot of these events. And that opportunity for inclusion, not just of women and people of color, but people from all backgrounds, circumstances, and situations, that was something that really drove me to want to be a part of this. So our community was extremely diverse. We had college dropouts, we had UPS truck drivers, we had lawyers, we had single moms, we had doctors, we had people who were in their 60s and 70s even come to our program. And it was come one, come all. Like I love everybody. I like working with everybody. And there's trade-offs you make in doing so though. So to answer your question, the demographics have changed over time. Because in the very beginning, back in 2011 when we started, they were crazy. They were crazy because this wasn't proven. There was no proof. There was no evidence that this would work. There was no substance. There was no frame of reference that they had to say, oh, it works there, so maybe I should sign up for this school and pay them thousands of dollars. Nope. So those people were crazy. They took a chance on us, and we delivered, thankfully. But that was a real risk. And I would say that there are some crazy ones still out there, but I will say it's normalized in a way where, we were Bootcamp number 1. There's over 130 coding boot camps all over the country now. Something crazy like that. So now the question is less about, are there coding schools, and more about which one's the right one for me? Which ones are actually of substance and quality, right, that I should go to? So I would say now there's a broader market for, alternative education. And with that broader market comes a level of kind of calculation and risk aversion that changes the demographic makeup of the classroom. But as far as the role that these people play in joining the larger workforce, there is still, just to be clear, I'm not saying that what we do replaces a computer science degree. It does not. there is a lot of value of still going to school and studying traditional engineering or traditional design. We're just a starting point because people don't know where to begin, and we help them from a very practical position. So that was a very long-winded version, but hopefully that answers your question. Awesome. So the question is what were my first steps in starting the very first business, right? So as far as those first steps, when I was a freshman at Northwestern University, I thought I wanted to make money, right? So when you go to a school like Northwestern, you go, how do you make money? Everybody says, study economics, become an investment banker or consultant, right? That's what everybody says, so that's what I started to do. I read these vault guides to finance, and I was doing all the stuff that normal people do when it comes to getting into finance and banking. But then we noticed that there was a problem, because as people were trying to get jobs in banking and consulting, even at a school like Northwestern, classes weren't adequately preparing you for those interviews and to get those jobs. There was a gap. There was a clear disconnect in what you were learning in the classroom and what you needed to know in the job interview. So we decided to solve that problem. Me and a group of friends that were all in this investment group called Nugget. It was like an investment club. And we created a new student group, new student organization. We named it ISBE, I-S-B-E, the Institute for Student Business Education. And we decided we were going to start an organization that would teach Northwestern students the skills that they needed to actually get the job at these consulting firms, at these banks. And it was taught by people who had gotten the jobs. Current students and alumni who got those jobs, they came back and they would run these workshops and programs and say, here's how you do it. That was a really cool program. But what was really awesome is the people I was a part of that started that were also people who had other entrepreneurial experiences. So the two guys that I ended up starting Context Media with, their names was Derek and Rishi. Derek and Rishi had both started businesses when they were in high school. I'd never done that. I didn't know how that worked. But they said, hey, Neal, we've had a lot of fun working with you building this student group. We have an idea for a company, and we'd be interested in seeing if you want to help us do it. And I said, what's the idea? They said, well, we want to put LCD screens in areas where people are going to be, because we think that we can share content and provide them with more information about what's important about whatever they're going to either buy or consume or learn. So that's interesting. So it turned into Context Media, which is basically a company that puts educational content in waiting rooms in doctors' offices. Because too often, especially back then, this was 2005, 2006, you go to a doctor's office and what was on the TV? Judge Mathis. What was the magazines you were reading? Vogue, Envy, whatever. It was just stuff that wasn't relevant. But instead, it was what if we actually put information on a screen when they're sitting in the waiting room that would prepare them to spend better time with their doctor? With the limited time you get with your doctor, why waste it saying the same thing over and over again and getting this information that can be easily shared with you before you go see your physician? And then when you see your physician, they can focus on your custom journey rather than repeating the same thing over and over again. So that's what we were able to do. And in doing so, it became extremely valuable very quickly. So that's how I started the first business. Now, there's a lot more that goes into that story when it comes to, we didn't just say, oh, we're going to start it and do it. We had to go, okay, we have to write a business plan. We have to get early stage angel investors. We have to find a office space. We have to build a prototype. We have to figure out how we're going to make money. Oh, let's find different pharmaceutical companies that want to advertise on the screens that'll help us fund it. Let's give the screens to doctors for free, but collaborate with them to make sure the content is what they need it to be for their patients to have success. There was a lot that went into that, but here I was 18, 19 years old, hiring people twice my age and building up this sales force and just grinding it out. And unfortunately skipping some classes, but I made up for it later on. But it was just an incredible experience to start this company just because you had an idea and you wanted to make it a reality. Yeah, so how do you find investors? So the way we did that was you actually build relationships with them, right? So one of the investors that we had was what you call an angel investor, so a non-formal investor, not like venture capital, but angels, even earlier stage, smaller size rounds, 6 figures usually. And one of our professors was interested in supporting this idea because this business plan was written in one of the classes, the entrepreneurship classes. I think it was engineering entrepreneurship actually, which is the class that I teach now at Northwestern. So out of that class came this business plan. And when you have that relationship, when they know you and they see you work, but you know that they've had some success in their life where they built a few businesses and had some exits and they have some disposable income, they might be willing to take a chance on you. Because at that early stage, approaching a traditional investor, almost a non-starter, especially in Chicago. We are a very revenue-based environment when it comes to investment. You need to show some traction and some progress before you can vie for a true kind of round of money. But yeah, you build those relationships first. You don't start off going, hey, give me money. You go, hey, I want to share this thing I'm working on. I want to get your feedback and advice on how it works. And by the way, down the road, like, we might need some help to accelerate our growth to get to the stage that we want to be and help more people. So if you're interested in helping us out, we could really use it because we've got about 3 months of runway. Help us out, right? So that's the simple version of it. But if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. I've worked at 2 VCs and a private equity firm, so yeah. So the question is about failures and what, like, I told a story, like a happy path of success. Like, oh, it all worked out every time. That's not true at all. So what were my failures? So first I want to say what I think of failures. I don't particularly believe in mistakes. I just think there are sometimes really expensive lessons, right? So that's it. So the real failure is when you don't learn from something that goes wrong. So I don't know failure too well. I know expensive lessons, and I've definitely had my fair share. So when I think about this, like, there are so many struggling moments at every level. Growing up as a kid, there were so many things that I could have done to not be where I'm at, you know, to have made some choices and to be in places I shouldn't have been. I got lucky in that regard because, you know, not a lot of people do get as lucky when it comes to being safe and smart. But in college, I would say that's where there was a lot of experience gained when it came to the struggles I had. So that first business I told you, Context Media, I left after the first year. A lot of people joke, like, why didn't you keep the equity? Because now it's worth almost $6 billion. Technically, Neal would have almost been a billionaire. Okay, cool, whatever. But I will say that experience taught me a lot. And one of the most important lessons it taught me, not as a failure, but as an expensive lesson, was to make sure that I truly understood the dynamics of running a business, that I understood the legalities of running a business, the fiscal responsibility of running a business, how to make sure you're taking care of everyone that's working for you. And I don't have a specific moment that I can point to say that was a failure, but what I can say is I struggled a lot during that time, that first year, because I wasn't doing that well in school. My grades weren't as good as they could have been, and Northwestern was a really great opportunity for me, and I had to make a really tough choice because I said, you know, I can keep running this business, but there's no clear path that's going to be my ultimate end goal, end game. And I said, do I quit, you know, and leave this organization, or do I stay in school? And I decided to stay in school. So there was no right choice. There was just a choice. And I made that then, and I continued to make them as I kept going. So I sold my company last year. I could have kept running the company, but I wanted to sell it because I saw an opportunity to help more people in a different way. So yeah, again, all expensive lessons, really expensive lessons. I wish I had more to talk about when it came to things that didn't work out, but I think sometimes failure might be overrated, and studying success is actually not a bad thing. And I think that if something works, make it work better. But like I talked about, I do care about failure at a granular level when you're writing code. I care about failure when you're in an environment like a classroom, and I don't like making people feel bad for not knowing something. I think that just means I have to help you more and help you be a better learner. So I don't start with, student isn't working hard enough. I start with, what have I not done as a teacher to enable you and to make you feel like you should care about this and put in the work to understand it? Or is there another way I need to provide it to you so that you make progress? So I would say my greatest failure is probably as a teacher, as an educator, because the students in the very beginning, when I don't know what I'm doing, they're gonna take the hit. So I'm overcommitted to make sure I'm helping them throughout the process, because as you teach, you get better at everything you do, right? So I want to make sure that I loop back around to the students that were in the beginning of anything I've ever taught, and that they continue to get my support and help, because I owe that to them. Does that make sense? Yeah, thank you. Great question. Yeah, so how much of the money when I was starting my businesses came from someone else versus myself? Context Media, the first business, we got seed money. I think it was around $250,000. A lot of money. That was great. That wasn't my work. I didn't even know what that meant. The other guy I was doing the business with figured that out and made that happen. For my company, Code Academy, we thought we were going to raise money because I had all these investor friends and venture capital buddies, and I knew everyone. And I said, hey guys, like, I've got this new idea. Will you give me money for it? And they're like, sure, we'll give you money. I'm like, great. And they're like, well, give us all this information first before we do it. And I'm like, well, I don't have time to give you all that information. I actually have to build the business. And they're like, no, but we can't give you the money unless we have all this information. I said, all right, well, I have to choose then. I could either build the business or I could get you all this information that I don't even know is real. So I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'll just start the business, and I don't know if it's going to work, but instead of paying, like having people pay out over time, I'll just ask them for all of the money up front, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to build this business without outside investment. So that's what I did. And all those people from all over the world that I showed you, they paid us up front for the program, which was our seed capital. So the best thing to do, the beautiful thing about that, is I was a full owner of my business the entire time. One of the big challenges with getting outside investment is that technically you now have a boss. Someone else owns your business. You own some of it, they own some of it, but very often they want more control. And they want to be able to kick you out if you don't do a good job, and they want to be able to call the shots in a lot of ways. And sometimes that's valuable and beneficial, especially if you want to grow a scaling organization. But sometimes when you want a small to medium-sized business, you're not trying to eat the world, you don't need someone breathing down your neck every day about the decisions you make. So I'd rather own all of my business if it's up to me, because I don't want to have some behemoth of an organization. I want to have a small organization where I know everyone's name and I can take care of them with really good benefits. So that was the approach that I took when I ultimately started my business. So the question is who were some of the biggest influences in my life, and how they played a role in the path that I've gone on. So like I told you, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Split home. So I didn't, my mom and my dad weren't together, but I spent, my early years living with my mom, and then my high school years living with my dad. My dad was a Chicago police officer for 30 years. My mom worked for Chicago Public Schools as a teaching assistant for special education, programs. And it's funny because the answer to your question before would have been a list of a bunch of tech CEOs and VCs and people like that I know. But when I really, really dug deep and thought about it more recently, I realized that even though my father and my mother weren't able to help me with my math homework past 5th grade, their commitment to serving their community and helping people, and their diligence and commitment to raising me and my sister in the best way they could, even if they didn't always get along or agree, that was the ultimate influence for me, hands down. And the fact that they're still in my life and supportive of everything I'm able to do, and while they still have more time than money, the love and the support from that group of friends, from your family, from that community, your village, is what's going to drive you to do everything that you do. That's what drives me. So sure, there's a lot of brilliant people and books that I read, and I end up meeting the authors and professors and thinkers and all this stuff. You get to share the stage with crazy people. But the most important thing is to have your core. And if you have your core and you make sure you take care of that core, you can't go wrong. So yeah, it was mom and dad. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
Are there any public figures or anybody?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can talk about some public figures too. So the question is, are there also any public figures? So I'll say there's one guy in particular who is now a dear friend, but in the beginning had a disproportionate amount of influence on my thinking. His name's Jason Fried, and he wrote this book called Rework. I highly recommend it. It is a very easy read. It's about a 4-hour read, 3 hours if you believe in yourself. and it's got pictures in it. It's great. But he basically wrote this book called Rework that said, you know what? All the stuff that people are talking about and how they run their businesses, I'm going to say the exact opposite. I'm just going to challenge all the thinking here and be a complete contrarian and tell you, you should send your employees home at 5 o'clock. You should not overwork. You should let them work remotely. You should give them really good benefits. You shouldn't pinch your profits to maximize shareholder value. You should grow a small business and not emphasize growth. He said all these crazy things that didn't make any sense to me as a venture capitalist and investor. But as I read them, the more I realized that even if that wasn't true, I wanted to believe it and I wanted that to be true. And it turned out it was true for one example and one guy who had built his own business. That business is called Basecamp. I hinted at it in my slides. So that guy is awesome. And we're good friends now, which is incredible. But if you follow someone long enough, every now and then they'll look around and you'll get to introduce yourself. So I got to do that a few years ago, and we've been friends ever since. And I'm really thankful that I got a hold of that book, because that is the book that I read the night before I walked into Sandbox and quit my job. And what's crazy about that is that book literally has a page in it that says, "Don't quit your job." But I ripped that page out because I was like, no, I know what I'm doing. But yeah, so Jason is if there were one name I would mention for you all to check out and get to know, it's Jason Fried. Yeah. So the question is how do you manage time when you have so many commitments and juggle all those things? Focus is so important. And I apologize for not taking my own advice in that regard. But I will say at the moments that created the disruptive innovations in my life, the things that really changed things, I was extremely focused. So when it came to Code Academy and launching the first coding bootcamp, there was nothing else you could talk to me about. If you ran into me on the street, I wanted to teach you some Ruby, right? Like that was what it was all about. I was living and breathing it. So I have these moments where I flare up and flare down, and so there's no kind of set like cadence or path. It's jagged. It's volatile. So you have to choose your moments where you decide to intensely focus and hit flow, and those other moments when you need to kind of be messy and chaotic. And another thing I would say is don't feel bad if you need to take some downtime, right? So the whole thing in business, and I tell my story, it makes it seem like I just worked hard all the time. No, I still play video games. I still hang out with my friends. I still watch movies. I love all these awesome things that are a lot of fun. You need that, because if you don't have that, even if you are making progress on the business side, you're not going to be happy, right? So I would encourage you to strike that balance and just understand that it's going to ebb and flow. Sometimes you're going to have way too much going on. Over time, that's not sustainable. But in a short period of time, sometimes it's okay. Other times, you're not going to have anything going on at all. And you're going to be like, what am I doing with my life? That's when you want to fill it with something meaningful. But there's no silver bullet. There's no single truth about how to manage that. The simplest thing to cut through all the mess is, am I working on something that I truly believe in? Am I doing something that is actually helping someone who I care about? Am I aligned in my purpose with the work that I have to get up and do today? If I'm not, you got to course correct and do something different. If you are, then you're on the path. Does that make sense? Cool. So the question is what made me choose the Ruby programming language over all the others? So I'll tell you, I started off with Python, right? I told that a little bit. And that was because that guy Harper, who was Barack Obama's chief technology officer, he was a Python guy, right? So I didn't know anything about coding. I knew a guy who knew something about coding. I said, what do you do? He says, I do Python. I said, great. Will you send me some books? He sent me some books. I read the books. I did some Python. That was cool. Then I discovered JavaScript. That's another programming language. JavaScript seemed really important because it was all around. And it was part of the front end, part of the back end, all part of the web. However, it was a lot harder to learn as a beginner because the readability of the language itself, the syntax, was actually a little challenging, and all the semicolons I had to plug in and all the gotchas and things like that. So as someone who knew nothing, when I found Ruby, I was like, wow, this actually reads like English. It makes sense a little bit, more than the other languages. So because of that, I just got drawn to it because of that simple, almost like friendliness that the language had and how it made me feel. Now, I don't think that there's any one great language. I think that you just have to choose your own adventure. That's like when you're in school and you're like, do I want to take the Spanish class or the French class? Well, where do you want to study abroad? You know, like what kind of thing do you want to build? What kind of thing do you want to learn? What kind of cultural experiences do you want to have? What kind of food do you like? So that's the same way when you choose a programming language. It's just a matter of like, choose one that you think resonates with you and make it your own. But you know probably really well that you have to learn more than one if you want to consider yourself a real programmer. You can't get away with just knowing one language. Maybe someone has, but I haven't. I have to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, SQL, all the different Ruby, and then Rails is a framework, a web framework, Python, Django, JavaScript, Node, React. There's all these different words and labels and languages. There's a whole sea of things that you can learn about in software. It's awesome. But it can also be really overwhelming and complicated. So stick to your comfort zone first to get started, and then struggle to make progress with the more complex languages. Awesome. Well, you all have been wonderful. I can't thank you enough for letting me come out here, and I'm excited to hear from you soon. Thank you. Cool.